Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to all of you who are watching. My name is David Miles, and I'm on a mission to help mortgage brokers and financial advisors to generate a consistent flow of their own leads so as they can stop stressing about where their next client is coming from. Now, as many of you know, usually in these sessions and in lots of the other training that I do, I'm talking about different ways that you can generate your own leads. But today I'm going off on a slightly different tack, because what I've found over the years is that people, they get the hang of how to generate their leads eventually, but what they're often not so good at is how to convert those leads into actual business, into clients. So what I'm going to talk about today is I'm just going to share a few tips on how you can improve the conversion rate on the leads that you generate online. And I think that's really important, because I think if I'm teaching you how to generate leads online, that's great. But what I also want to do is help you get the best return on investment from those leads, hence talking today about the best way to follow up and close as many of those leads as possible. So just before we get going, if you haven't already done so, do feel free to say hello in the comments, just so I know that the comment screen is working. I can see a few of you over there saying hi already, so that's great. As we go through, usual thing applies. Put as many questions or comments or whatever as you like in there, and then when I've gone through the slides and the presentation, I will go through and have a look at the questions and answer those as best I can. And also feel free to put in questions if you're watching this on the replay, because I will keep an eye on the comments over the next few days and jump in and answer any new questions that come up. So with all that out of the way, let's just get the slides up and then we can get started. Okay, right. So the first point I want to make, and I think it's a really important one, is that the kind of leads you get online that you generate via your own website are often a very different type of prospect from those that you may have been used to getting from other methods like referrals and word of mouth. So what I mean by that is, if you're getting business from referrals, or you're going to networking events, or you've got a shop or an office on the high street that people are walking past and they're seeing you several times when they're dropping in, those kinds of people, they're already aware that you exist. They've already had some kind of exposure to you or your brand or your company before they make that first contact with you. And that's a very different thing from what you get with online leads, because with online leads, people, some of the people you get as online leads will have been searching. So, they'll have searched on Google and they'll have clicked on a Google Ads result that takes them to your website, or they'll have found you in the organic results and clicked through. So those people, they're reasonably warm leads in that they've got a high intent. They've got a high intent to get some financial advice or take out a mortgage or whatever it is, because they were actively searching on Google for those kinds of products and services. But what they don't have is any existing relationship with you and your business. So there isn't any kind of, existing relationship, and there's no kind of underlying trust being built up. So although they have a high intent, they probably don't know your business at all. So in that regard, they're quite different from people who've been recommended or referred to you, or who have heard of you through word of mouth of some sort. Then the other kind of online leads you get are the people who've stumbled across you. So an example of the stumbled type of lead would be people who have seen a Facebook ad, for example, and they've been on Facebook, they've stumbled across your advert and they've clicked through. Now those people, they don't have any existing relationship with you, and they probably don't really have any particular reason to trust you. Same as the people who searched. But what's even worse with the people who stumbled is they have a lower intent as well, because they weren't actually even looking for mortgages or financial advice. They just came across your advert and clicked through. So either way, whether they've searched or they've stumbled, the people that you get from online leads are generally not as familiar with you and your business, and therefore they tend to need a different approach. You need to approach them differently from how you would with someone that you've already met and who's now contacting you, or someone that's been recommended or referred to you. So the first tips I want to give you are around how to handle that initial interaction with the leads that have come from an online source, whether that first interaction is them actually picking up the phone and calling you, or whether they filled in an inquiry form of some sort and now you are ringing them back. So the first thing I think you need to keep in mind is that people who are coming to you colder like that are more likely to begin the conversation, or try to begin the conversation, talking about things like price or rates or stuff like that, whether that's the prices you charge or the mortgage rates you've got available or whatever. Now, I had a really good example of this a few years ago, which I've actually written a blog article about. So some of you may have seen this on my website already. But I was working with a small dental practice, and they had traditionally got all of their inquiries, all of their new clients through word of mouth, obviously very appropriate for a dentist, but they'd got them all through referrals and recommendation and whatever. And they were, with my help, trying some online advertising with Google Ads for the first time. It's the first time I'd done any kind of online promotion of the business at all. And we actually, with them, found we were generating quite a decent volume of leads, but they weren't managing to convert any of them into clients. And they've got a call recording system in place. So I actually, in conjunction with them, sort of reviewed some of the calls and stuff. And we found a really clear pattern that actually what was happening was people were coming onto their website. They were then phoning up the dental practice and they were saying, hello, I found you on Google and I'm interested in, whatever it might have been, teeth straightening or dental implants or whatever. Dental implants was the main thing they were promoting. And the receptionist would sort of ask them if they had implants before and like that, and the caller would go straight into, no, how much do they cost? What do you charge for implants? And then the receptionist would say, well, it varies because you need to come in for a checkup, and then you've got an x-ray, and if you need this, it will cost this, if you need this, it will cost that. And the point was the whole thing was getting bogged down in a big discussion around price. And typically what was then happening was the caller was going, okay, well, thanks for the info, I'll have a think and call you back, put the phone down. And that was very different, obviously, from what they would get, what the receptionist had been used to. The receptionist had been used to people phoning up and saying, oh, my friend, Mr. So-and-so, recommended that I come to you. When can you fit me in? And if there was a question about price, it tended to be almost a secondary thing. So what we actually did in the case of this dentist was took a completely different approach, and I helped them sort of develop a phone answering scripting process whereby the receptionist would take the call and they would steer it all away from anything about price, and they'd say, look, don't worry about price. We offer a free initial assessment. You come in for 15 minutes and we'll have a look. We'll see if implants are even the right thing for you. If they are, we'll talk about the options, no obligation, no pressure, etc. And by doing that, they found that they were suddenly now getting about 3/4 of the people who made an initial inquiry accepted that offer of a free assessment. And of those that had the assessment, just under half went on to pay for the full treatment, because once they'd actually got them into the surgery and they'd had a chance to have a conversation with them, build up a bit of trust, a bit of rapport, etc., then it was a different story. And I find a similar thing in my own business. If it doesn't happen very often, but sometimes people just come across they do a search online and they find my website and they ring up and ask about someone like me running their Google Ads campaigns for them. And 9 times out of 10, if they do that, if they've had no interaction with me at all beforehand, their first question is, what do you charge to run people's Google Ads? And those kind of conversations basically never go anywhere. What I like to try and do instead is, and this is sort of bring it into the second and third points on the slide there, is find something easy that you can offer that person to do in that initial call. So in the case of the dentist, it was come in for a nice, easy, no obligation 15-minute assessment. In my case, if someone is ringing up that wanting to know about Google Ads management, I'll say, well, it depends. It depends on what's involved and what state your account is. But first of all, why don't you let me have a quick look at your Google Ads account for you, do a free checkup, and then I can tell you whether you even need my help. Maybe you don't need your Google Ads managed because maybe it's all perfect already. And that's a nice, easy thing for them to test the water with without having to make any huge degree of commitment. So, as a financial advisor or as a mortgage broker, how can you take that same kind of approach? How can you make sure that initial call with the prospect isn't just about them saying, how much do you charge or what's the best mortgage rate you can get me? How can you do something which is a low commitment and make it easy for them as well. Because the other thing that can go wrong is to go, well, I'll send you out this fact, I'll email you over this fact find, fill that in and send it back. Most clients aren't going to want to do that. That's quite a bit of, you're putting quite a bit of work, or what, or something certainly that seems like a fair bit of work onto them. And let's be honest, if they wanted to just fill in loads of paperwork, they could go to their own bank and do that. The whole reason that they're looking to come to someone like a mortgage broker is to get more hand holding and more help. So, on that initial call, think about how you could just have a casual conversation with them, in which you ask them some questions, and it's just all very sort of friendly and casual. But in the course of that conversation, you're actually extracting the information that's going to make up half the fact find. And then if you do send them something afterwards, you can have pre-populated that with the answers that they gave you during that call. And of course, they're answers they gave you without even necessarily realizing that they were, basically giving answers to some kind of questionnaire. So those are the first things. Keep that initial interaction with them. Keep it nice and simple. Don't ask for huge degrees of commitment. Don't put lots and lots of work onto the client. And just think, what can I do to do something for them that's nice and simple to begin with, that illustrates and demonstrates that I can do the job for them, and starts that process of building up that trust and getting them to know, like, and trust you, basically, as we've talked about on other sessions in other contexts. But it's the same thing applies here. Now, the next thing that's important is understanding and deciding what communication channels to use. And the overarching thing here that I want to stress is, you as the business owner, as the mortgage broker, the IFA, or whatever kind of business you're in, you need to, as far as possible, communicate in the same way that the client does. Okay, so if the client clearly has a preference for contacting you by email, reply by email. And if you do feel, if it does reach a point where you need to kind of switch communication channel, if you've been emailing them but now you need to talk to them for 10 minutes on the phone just to get some stuff done, well, ask first. Say, is it all right to give you a ring? Or when would be a good time to give you a ring to go through this bit? Because it'll be much quicker to do this bit by phone than by email or whatever. I've got a really, really good example of this from something that happened to me. Again, it's something I've written about in my blog before, so some of you may have heard the story, but I think it bears repeating, because it illustrates some of these points really well. This is a couple of years ago. I was shopping around for medical insurance, and I went onto two websites. One was Vitality, I'm sure you're all familiar with. The other was a smaller company called EquipsMe, and I filled in stuff on both sites. And the way that the two companies followed up was so different, and really, really illustrates a lot of these points. So with EquipsMe, I went onto their website, I filled in the forms, the online form, and after about 20 minutes, this was one evening I was doing this, after about 20 minutes, I got an email from somebody at EquipsMe. It turned out, I found out that he was actually one of the directors of the company, asking me a few follow-up questions, a few emails backwards and forth over the next hour or so. And the next day, I got an email with my quote and instructions on how to accept, how to accept the quote if I wanted to. I had a few other queries. So I actually, because the guy who'd been emailing me had his mobile number on his email signature, I actually sent him a text message saying, I've got a couple of questions before I go ahead with it. Can you tell me, X and Y, whatever it was? And he texted me back with the answer. So note there, you see, he's matching the communication channel that I'm using. I texted him those questions, so he texted me back with the answers. And so within 24 hours of doing that initial inquiry, I'd got all the info I needed to decide if they were the right company and their policy was right for me and whatever. And crucially, from my point of view at that time, I hadn't had to get on the phone with anyone or go through any kind of sales calls or anything like that. Okay, and I'll talk more about that aspect of things in a minute. Now, by contrast, the Vitality experience was very different. So their website, to be fair, it gave me a price online straight away, and an automated email with the price confirmed, and it was more than I wanted to pay, so I just thought, fine, whatever, ignored it. But then the next day, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognise at 8 in the morning. There's no way I was answering the phone to an unknown number at 8 in the morning. They didn't leave a message, but I did Google the number and found out from that it had been Vitality calling. They rang again at around lunchtime that same day, and again I ignored it. They called again at the end of that day, so that's 3 calls now, and I've ignored all 3. And the next day they rang again. Now that time I was actually in the car driving home from somewhere, was in a queue of traffic, nothing better to do, so I took their call. And basically they refused to talk to me because I was driving, even though, you know, I rather felt that should be my decision whether I was willing to talk to them when I was driving. And it was all, you know, all hands-free and all totally legal and safe and whatever. But anyway, the point was they, you know, they hounded me by phone. And, you know, and then when we did get hold of me, they sort of gave me a lecture on the fact I shouldn't have answered the call to them anyway, because I was driving apparently. So, you know, you can't win. And obviously, yeah, Vitality didn't get the business. So my points there are, wherever possible, use the same comms channel that the clients used. If you do want to change to something, to a different channel, you know, try and get their, you know, ask them first or tell them why you need to and try and get their buy-in. Because also bear in mind as well, I think one of the things that has changed during the last year, during the COVID pandemic, it's accelerated a trend that I was starting to see already, which was that people don't seem so much these days, I found anyway, people don't seem so much these days to phone people out the blue. You know, these days, if somebody wants to talk to me, whether that's, you know, a supplier or a client or whatever, or even sometimes friends, they tend to send a message first saying, are you free to talk? Or is it okay if I give you a call at 10 o'clock or whatever? The spontaneous phone calls seem to be, you know, becoming a bit of a thing of the past. And I feel that's accelerated during the last year. I think probably because more and more things that used to be phone calls have now become Zoom calls instead. And obviously with a Zoom call, you do need to kind of schedule it in rather than just ring somebody on the off chance. So bear that in mind, because, you know, if that's the kind of thing that is changing, then if you're ringing prospects out of the blue, that's going to be a bit of a, oh, well, you know, it's going to take them by surprise, and they're going to feel that's a bit strange and a bit uncomfortable. And of course, that's not the way to start a sales call, with the other person feeling ill at ease or whatever. And the third thing, which ties into this, is knowing your audience, because I've talked in sort of some general terms there, but what's been found and, you know, talked about by other people quite a lot is that different generations prefer, on the whole, different styles of communication, different communication channels. So it's illustrated in this diagram, which sort of takes, you know, the current UK population and breaks it down into 6 broad different segments, different generations. And so you've got, starting at the top, you've got the veterans, or something that's called the silent generation. They're the ones born before 1945. You know, obviously grew up during the Second World War and earlier and whatever. And generally speaking, they would be the kind of people who, for example, still get nearly all of their news via traditional newspapers, you know, rather than online sources. After them, you've got the baby boomers, you know, that post-war generation. They're, for example, generally quite happy using the phone, and you know, for many of them, phone would be their sort of default communication channel. Moving on, you've then got Generation X, or as I call it, the best generation. Then after that, you've got millennials, or also known as Generation Y. Now, Generation Y, they are very much, they were sort of the first generation really that sort of openly expressed not wanting to be sold to and not liking being marketed to. And they seem to be the first generation that don't really enjoy using the phone, or at least not in its traditional sense, you know, not for actually having conversations with people. And it's ironic in a way, because really that millennial generation, the vast majority of them have grown up with, you know, with smartphones, or at very least mobile phones, available to them, you know, for as long as they can remember. You know, I remember I got my first mobile phone soon after I left school in 1994. And at that time, they were still quite unusual. And, you know, to the point where I remember going to the pub once with my friends and making sure the phone was well hidden in my pocket, because if you turned up the mobile phone, you know, people would have taken the mickey. But within a couple of years, you know, I would say by sort of 96, 97, suddenly everyone had mobile phones. So, you know, there was a massive uptake. And so that generation, those millennials born between 1980 and 1999, they will, you know, have known mobile phones all the way through. But as I say, they're generally not that comfortable just talking on the phone, because for them, the phone has always been all about texting, or, you know, more recently, WhatsApp messaging. So, you know, that kind of thing needs to be borne in mind. And of course, increasingly, as time goes on, more and more of your client base are going to be people who are those millennials, or even now, Generation Z, because Generation Z, you know, that's my kids' generation. Basically, they're the ones who have been born from 2000 onwards. So the oldest of them are, you know, are already on the verge of being your youngest potential clients. And you know, if I think about the way my teenage kids communicate with their friends, there's no phone calls. They're not like, you know, we were when I was a teenager, kind of hidden away in your bedroom, hoping your parents don't notice you've been on the phone for an hour or whatever. For them, it's all about the text, the WhatsApp, this, you know, instant messaging, private messaging on social media platforms, basically anything except actually picking up the phone and talking. And that's important because you know, I was doing some work with a client recently, and I said to him, you know, perhaps when you get a lead come in, you might actually want to send them a quick text saying, you know, when would be a good time to talk. He was very, very anti the idea of texting clients or prospects because he felt that was too informal. Now, I don't know exactly what his age is, but I would guess that within that chart, he's probably on the younger end of the baby boomer bit. So, you know, for him, yeah, the phone is perfectly normal, but texting would be informal. But the kind of people he's communicating with potentially would prefer a text. You know, because the other thing actually to say about those younger ones, millennials and Generation Z, a lot of them don't even really use email either. So, you know, what some of us might think of still as fairly modern, and email is, you know, is old school to a lot of those younger generations. So be aware of that, and be aware that you may need to modify your communication style based not just on how the person is communicating with you, but also think, what is their default preference likely to be? Obviously, you know, it's a generalization, but what kind of things are they likely to be more comfortable with based on the, you know, when they were born and the age demographic and that kind of thing. And then the other thing to talk about is timing. Now, one of the golden rules always told about, you know, in sales and in business is, if you get an inquiry come in, jump on it straight away, respond really promptly. You know, and I'm sure if ever you've bought leads from lead generation companies that have said it's really important that, you know, whatever time of the day or night the lead comes in, you contact them as soon as you can, and people who contact them within the first few minutes are more likely to close the deal, etc., etc. So absolutely, totally agree with that. You need to respond promptly. You know, like EquipsMe did with me in that story I was telling earlier on. You know, I got the email that same evening rather than, whereas Vitality left it till the next day to try and follow up. So yeah, I'm a big believer in that. Strike while the iron is hot, because, you know, if someone has searched on Google and clicked through to your website from there, clearly at that moment, getting a mortgage or getting a pension or whatever it was top of their mind. There's no guarantee it will still be top of their mind by the next day. So yeah, strike while the iron is hot. But think about the communication channels again. Think, for example, is it a good time to phone? Now, you see, I've got a client I'm working with at the moment where he was telling me a couple of weeks ago that he'd had a lead come in from the website at something like 10 o'clock at night or something. And he'd got the lead come through, and he'd got straight on it, responded straight away by phoning them. And when the person answered the phone, he said, "Oh, got your inquiry. Is this a good time to talk, or would you rather we spoke tomorrow?" And he said, "Oh," and the person sounded a little bit surprised I'd even got a call at that time of night or that quickly. And we said, "Oh yeah, ring me back, you know, 6 o'clock tomorrow or something." And so my client did ring them back at 6 o'clock next day, and it went to voicemail, and, you know, it took me ages to get hold of them. And I said to him, "Well, do you think maybe that was the wrong approach? Because just because that person was around at 10 o'clock and was on your website filling in your form, that doesn't mean they were able to talk at that point." You know, people go, obviously, you know, because of smartphones, everything, people go onto websites, you know, when they're out, when they're in the pub, when they're on the bus, you know, when they're sitting in front of the TV. Doesn't mean that they want to talk at those points. In fact, if you really want an illustration of that point, surveys show, I don't know who did these surveys, but surveys show that 57% of people use their phone when they're on the toilet. If you think that's bad, apparently 62% of women and 48% of men check their phones during sex. Now, all of those people, they may be happy to send you an email or a text message or fill in a form on your website when they're doing any of those things. Doesn't mean that they'd actually go quite so far as to pick up the phone and talk to you if you ring them back. So think, is it actually a good time to phone? What I would do in that situation, if I got, if an inquiry came through that late at night, is probably, to be able to tick the box of quick response, fine, send them an email back or a text message saying, got your inquiry, happy to talk now if you really want to, but equally, we can talk and when would be a good time. So you're responding straight away, but you're not being sort of too in your face of jumping straight in with a phone call at 10 o'clock at night or whatever. One way you can sort of enhance that approach as well is to let people self-serve their appointment settings. So one thing you could do that works, I've seen work quite well, is you have the inquiry form on your website that people can fill in saying we'd like a call back, just put in their name and phone and email or whatever. And then after they filled that in, you could take them to a page on your website that says, thanks for your inquiry. We'll try giving you a call. We'll typically call you back within an hour if it's office hours, or tomorrow morning if this is after hours. Alternatively, would you like to set a time for us to call you back? And then you use something like Calendly or 10 to 8 or any of those other kind of online appointment booking things to offer them a choice of times where they can then select, again, striking while the iron's hot, while this is top of their mind, let them book in and select a time when you can call them back. Because if they've chosen the time, there's far more likelihood that when you do ring, you're actually going to get hold of them, rather than if you just, take a random punt and call them at 10:30 the next morning, they may or may not be around. So that could be a really good way to increase the contact rate with your follow-ups. And also consider putting those people who make an inquiry, putting them into your email autoresponder. See, I've talked about email autoresponders in other sessions, and I cover it a lot on my in my membership program. So those of you on there will know a lot about it. But those same kind of email follow-up systems that you use for when people have downloaded a lead magnet from your website, you can use those as well for the people who've made an actual inquiry. So, have an automated email going, great, we've got your inquiry, and you're telling them what's going to happen next. And don't be afraid to have a sequence of emails that go out over the following days, because it may be 2 or 3 days before you're actually able to get hold of them on the phone. And so each of those follow-up emails will help, keep them warm. It will help to start build that relationship and nurture them. So as by the time you do speak to them, they feel like they know you a bit, and there's already a bit more rapport there before you even have the conversation. And then the final couple of things to say are to know when to give up. So certainly, do try, if you are following up a lead, do try more than once. And there are still people around who think, oh, I'll call this lead once, and if they don't answer, well, that's it, they're in the bin. So I'm certainly not saying to take that approach. Depending on what, which articles you read about this, people reckon that often people need anything between 5 and 7 contacts with you before they're ready to become a client or whatever. And obviously you can use automation, as I said, to help that kind of thing. So you should try them more than once, because sometimes you just get lucky with the timing. I know I've been on the receiving end of things where I've made an inquiry about a particular product or service, and then the company's tried to call me the next day about it. And it's not that I haven't wanted to have a conversation about it more, but I've just been busy, or something else has taken over. And, they've tried 3 or 4 times. And on the 4th time, they've just got lucky that they happen to have rung, when I'm just walking home from somewhere, or just got in the car and I've got nothing better to do than talk to them, or whatever it might be. So do try multiple times, because it could just be luck that, at some point you just get your timing right, and the person is, between 2 different tasks, and they, oh yeah, I'll take this call. But once you've done a certain number of attempts, and, you can decide what your number of attempts is. The second thing I would do is say to use the taking it away approach. Very often people want what they can't have. So after you've tried a certain number of times, let's say you've tried 4 times and not been able to get hold of the person, at that point, I would just send them an email saying something like, look, I've tried you a few times, not got hold of you. I don't want to keep bothering you. So I'm not going to contact you again, because I'm guessing you've changed your mind, or this isn't a good time to do this after all. Obviously, if you change your mind, you know who I am. And very often, by actually sort of taking the thing away like that, that spurs people to think, oh, no, if you're taking it away, I want it. And then they'll ring you and go, oh, I'm really sorry. Yes, let's get on with it and deal with it. So that can work quite well as well. So there we are. That's my sort of few tips for how you can improve the follow-up of the leads. I think the main thing is, just try some of these things. Whether you're buying leads in from external companies, if that's your thing, or whether you're generating them online yourself, either way, you've paid good money and put a lot of time and effort into getting those leads. So really my message is, don't blow it with bad follow-up. try putting some of these tips into action, and leave a comment. Let me know how you get on. Feel free, come back in a couple of weeks if you've never tried any of these things. Try something, come back, leave a comment, and let me know. Obviously, if you've got any other ideas, put those in the comments as well. So I shall wrap it up there. I hope you found that useful. As I say, it's a little bit different from what I normally do, but I think it's an important part of the whole picture to be able to give you some advice on closing the leads, as well as focusing on what I normally do of actually how to generate them. So thanks so much for joining us. Have a good evening. Cheers. Bye.